So next on our list is to take some of these objects and prep them and get them ready for some event-driven actions. We want to be able to check for when an object collides with another object, and then in that collision event, what do we want to do? We may be playing an explosion, we may be getting rid of an object or resetting an object, and we want to make sure that our objects are prepped and ready to take advantage of just that. So we're going to go back in here, we're going to check on some of these. On our prefab asteroid, we can look over here, and we can see that we've got a sphere collider, and then the other options with the renderer, with the filter, with our own script, and then our material. And the thing that we want to look at first is just the collider right in here. We're going to be setting this to an is trigger. We want this to be a trigger collider. We also want to apply a rigid body component to it. So we're going to go to our components, to our physics, and to a rigid body. Now, we don't want to be using any kind of gravity with this. We just simply want the rigid body, and we want it set up with the is kinematic. So we're going to check on that one. And this sets up our asteroid for use in our game. We'll go ahead and close this one up. Next one we want to check on, we can go on down to our prefab block. And on the block, we don't need really any kind of rigid body on this. We just want to be able to check for collision events with our box collider. We could set that one to an is trigger. And this is something that if it works, it works. We can always go back and readjust and change some of these properties. We're just going to kind of take a guess right now. The other one we have is a prefab bullet. We're going to make this one a trigger event as well. And we're also going to be adding in our physics and our rigid body to this one. And just like from before, we're going to turn the gravity off. We're going to make this is kinematic. And what else do we have here? We have a prefab explosion. We've got the jet that goes under our object, and then we've got the player prefab. And the player prefab, we can go back in. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to check on our box collider. We're going to make this a trigger event. And we're going to add a component with the physics and the rigid body. And again, just like before, we don't want this as a fully physics object. We're just taking advantage of the rigid body for our event actions. We're going to go ahead and say is kinematic and turn that one on. So with these set up, we've got our objects prepped and ready, and we can go ahead and go in and start working with our on trigger events. But right before we do that, we're going to get enough pieces in the scene that we might as well start saving the scene. We do have all of these pulled back to our actual prefab, so we don't really have to save the scene when you're just creating the objects and the assets and getting them ready, but we're getting close enough and far enough along that we're going to start placing objects and testing things in here, so we might as well go ahead and have a nice little sandbox world to test with. So let's go ahead and save this one. We'll do save scene as, and this is just simply going to save it into our assets folder, and we'll just call this one our scene 1. We'll do save, and inside of our project tab we can see that we have our scene 1 right in here, so that way in case we ever need to come back to it, it's right in there. And one more thing we can add into this scene, we go ahead and add a light into the scene. When we look at the game view down here, we're a little bit dark, a little bit shadowed, so let's go ahead and go to our game object, create other, and let's drop in a directional light. And with the directional light you can see that we've all of a sudden got some nice lighting in here. Everything gets much brighter, much more well lit. We'll pull this back out of the way. There we go. And then one other thing we could set up while we're in here, and we're defining this little scene, this little tangent here, we can go back in, we can change up some of the camera properties. So right now we're just on a regular perspective camera. Let's change this over and make this more of an orthographic camera. With the perspective, we actually have perspective on the lens. What we want to do is the orthographic, it actually has no perspective point. All the lines are parallel, so we're going to go to our orthographic. And the orthographic gives us a nice little box. It also flattens things out. Basically, it creates a very two-dimensional kind of feel. Now, setting this up is a little bit different. If you look down there, way down there, this is basically the clipping plane, the far clipping plane way down there. Now we can select on these points inside the screen to pull those in and out, change up that size. And changing up that size is going to be bringing our object closer to the screen or moving it further away. The camera itself doesn't actually move, it's just the size of our projection box. So we're going to tighten this one up. We'll go ahead and use our size option right in here. And take this one down just a little bit. And the distance way out there, again, that's just the far clipping plane. Let's just bring that one back in just a wee bit, from 1,000 to just 25. That way we're not quite so huge while we're working with it. Make sure that your camera is set up a little bit behind it, and that your objects are inside of that box. And the other thing that we can do is test real fast. Make sure that our object is still fairly close to where we have set up for our limits, which was about 4, somewhere in there. So looking pretty good. We can make some adjustments. Alright. So that gets us set up. We've got a good view here. We've got a light inside the scene. We've got our objects set up the way we need to. The only thing that we haven't done to our objects that we will once we start working over the scripts is to actually tag these objects so that we can register them or work with them inside of our scripts. But that'll do it for now. Next thing we'll look at is some of our on-trigger events.